buenos dias, buenas tardes, and buen noche, depending on where you're tuning in from tonight. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Busboys and Poets Books Presents. We have a really special program for you tonight. As you can see, we have our guest with us tonight, and I know I'm going to do the boring thing of reading a little bit out to you, but that's hopefully to introduce you all to these amazing folks. And so, I don't actually know how it's going to be arranged on y'all's end. So, up next to me somewhere, Laurel Cubano and Raquel Ortiz are joining us from Puerto Rico. Laurel Cubano Santiago is a narrator in the Voice of Witness oral history book, Maria, Surviving the Storm, and a community organizer in Puerto Rico with a background in journalism. Following Hurricane Maria, Laurel mobilized mutual aid efforts with her community to feed hundreds of people, despite not receiving any aid from the supply ships that were docked just minutes away in La Perla in San Juan. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that. Joining us, we also have Dr. Raquel M. Ortiz, who is an Emmy-nominated writer, anthropologist, educator, and award-winning children's book author. She's the author of El Arte de la Identidad. Sorry, guys, I was born in the U.S. And director of the documentary Memories on the Wall, Education and Enrichment Through Community Murals. She has published 6 picture books, including Broken Butterfly Wings, Alitas de Mariposa, which was published in 2021 with the University of Houston Press. In addition, joining us as well is Dr. Lucia Anchansky, who is a professor in the English department at the University of Puerto Rico at Maya West and is one of the co-editors of Voice of Witness book, Mi Maria, Surviving the Storm. So y'all are probably wondering, okay, we have these amazing folks on here. What are we talking about? So today's program is all about Mi Maria, Surviving the Storm, Voices from Puerto Rico, which we've kind of already name dropped a couple times. And it tells the stories of Puerto Ricans who lived through Hurricane Maria in September of 2017 and the ongoing aftermath. And so I am not going to take up any more time. I'm going to go ahead and let these lovely ladies take the floor. Muchísimas gracias, Laurel, Raquel, and Ricia, for joining us. And I'll see you guys on the other side.
Thank you. Hola, hola. So, hello, welcome to everyone who's joining us. Thanks so much for joining us for this event and for sharing and being interested in Mi Maria, Surviving the Storm. So, it's co-hosted by poets and poets and voices of witness. As they said before, I'm a Ortiz, an author, an educator, and an activist. And I'm super excited to be physically here today and virtually here in Croatia. Introducing this project and introducing these incredible speakers. So before we continue, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we're gathered physically in some places and recognize and thank those whose lands we're on. Since we're doing this virtual, I'll share that I'm calling from Puerto Rican, that's also known as Puerto Rico. And if people in the chat would like to share the indigenous lands that they're in, that would be wonderful. And if you don't know, you can look it up on the location of the website by going native and thoughts ca native land.ca. So I'd like to introduce a little bit more about our 2 incredible speakers. So our first one, I'm starting with our virtual one, with Dr. Rachel Chansky. She is a professor of English in the department, in the English department at the University of Puerto Rico in Maya West. And she's a co-editor of this book. Rachel worked with Voices of Witness and more than 150 of her students to collect and to amplify the stories of hurricane survivors across the archipelago. And this turned into a large-scale public oral history project that led to this book becoming. And then right next to me, we have Laurel Gulbano Santiago. She is a narrator in Maria, Surviving the Storm. She's a community organizer, and she's the founder of Old San Juan Heritage Foundation, as well as an arts center, Colectivo Pan Arte. And after Hurricane Maria, Laurel coordinated mutual aid efforts with her community and helped to feed hundreds of people, despite not getting any aid from supply ships docked minutes away in San Juan. So today's event is going to feature our new book, the Voices of Witness series, Mi Maria, Surviving the Storm, which is edited by Rico and Mercy Denesi. And as all of you know, almost 5 years ago, in September of 2017, Hurricane Maria engulfed Puerto Rico for over 30 hours. The storm was horrible, but there was more catastrophe to come. Lack of government support and aid left many in the archipelago without housing, without electricity, clean water, food, or medical care for many, many, many months. And years later, we can all share sadly that Puerto Rico is still recovering. So Mi Maria, Surviving the Storm, is an oral history collection that brings together 17 first-person stories from Puerto Rican. This explores how communities come together in the wake of disaster, and it looks at what it means to be a U.S. citizen in a colonial context, and how inequity is exacerbated on the front lines of climate crisis. So Mi Maria is the latest book in a series of books from Voices of Witness, and they look at human rights oral history nonprofit that works to amplify the voices of people impacted by and fighting against injustice. Voices of Witness provides oral history training, editorial guidance, and funding for this project. And this book is published by Haymarket Books, an independent publishing house based in Chicago. And the book is available for purchase now, right now, on the Haymarket webpage. Thank you. Make sure you don't show it upside down. So, and Mi Maria is very accessible for readers of all backgrounds, including students, college students, high school, even I believe some middle students can handle this material. And there are also a lot of and advocates can download directly from the Voices of Witness webpage. And then today, June 30th, is the last day for educators and nonprofits to apply for the Voices of Witness Sharing History Initiative to receive free class sets of Mi Maria. So please look at the post that we have, and if you have a class or if you know of a teacher that can use this or if a professor, please reach out and please share this incredible resource with them. So without any further ado, I am going to invite Rachel to speak a little bit about her experience. And if you could please talk to us a bit about how this project developed. And it started in your classroom a couple weeks after the hurricane, correct? So if you could talk about that, please.
Thank you so much, Raquel, for guiding our discussion tonight. And thank you so much to Busboys and Poets for hosting us this evening. I think that one of the things that it's important for folks to know about our book is that when our students returned to campus after Hurricane Maria, it was on October 30th, approximately 5 weeks after Hurricane Maria made landfall in the Puerto Rican archipelago. And so when our students returned to the classroom, they returned to the classroom not having a stable source of food, not having a stable source of clean drinking water, not having electricity, not having gas for their cars, not having telecommunications. And so the university really provided a safe space for students. We were able to organize food for students. We were able to organize places for students to sleep when they were rendered homeless because of the hurricane. We were able to try to connect students to family members that they had lost track of. And our campus acted as this kind of shelter and this kind of resource for our students and for other people on the west coast of the main island of the Puerto Rican archipelago. And so when we started this project, it was a labor of love for our students because we couldn't go back to business as usual in the classroom. We couldn't say, let's return to the syllabus and let's start exactly where we were. We had to acknowledge the fact that we as faculty had stood in water lines for 8 hours to get clean drinking water next to our students. We had stood in gas lines. We had helped each other. We had fed each other. We had comforted each other. And so we really, some of those walls that are between folks really disappeared at that time. And so this project was created to empower students, to teach them ethical methods of storytelling for social justice so that they could enter their home communities and they could listen to the stories that were most important to them. They could reach out to the people who had helped them, the people that they were proud of, the people who they felt they wanted to highlight and they wanted to share. So that was kind of the genesis of the project. And the other thing that I'll say about that is that as the leader of the project, when I started out, I was very angry at the failures of the government that I saw all around me and the really needless and senseless prolonging of the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And so when we started working on this project with our students, that was something that I brought up, that one of the things that I wanted to do in this project was to look at some of those failures so that they would never happen again, so that they wouldn't happen to us in our communities, but also they wouldn't help to other communities that were also on the front line of climate disaster. And the student said to me, Profe, the way we want to do that is by celebrating what communities did to help each other. And that was really profound for me. And that was the approach that we adopted for this book, celebrating people like Laurel, who stood up for her community, who took care of so many people in her community. And we know that she did not receive the assistance that she should have received from government level support and government level relief, but she and others like her are the people that we wanted to celebrate in this project.
Great, and I'm wondering what approach that you wanted to use with your students regarding the oral history project. What are doing it? But I'll go on to the next question. So, what could you speak a bit about the main themes that emerged across the narratives that were gathered?
Thank you. That's a really interesting question, Raquel. I think that one of the things that really emerged is this idea of resilience, which is a term that I have a really big problem with, because the term resilience applied to this situation and others like it suggests that people just keep bouncing back, and so that they don't need support because of that. And I disagree with that. I think that there is this great spirit of creativity and ingenuity, and there is a great depth of people who are able to pull upon resources, their imagination, and each other to create amazing things. But I don't ever want to move into the space in which we excuse the government for the failures that they have to our frontline communities. And so this idea of people creatively, intelligently, and with kindness and dignity helping each other through the worst of situations is something that we see across all of the narratives. Something else that we're seeing is that, and I'll point to two other things. Something else that we're seeing is that there was a significant lack of resources. And if we remember, Hurricane Maria came on the heels of Hurricane Harvey. And the difference in the responses to what happened in Texas with Hurricane Harvey and Florida with Hurricane Irma compared to what happened in the Puerto Rican archipelago with Hurricane Maria were very dramatic. I personally received a relief box from the United States government that had a note in it that said, "People of Houston, your government is with you." I'm not in Houston, I'm in Puerto Rico. And so I received a recycled box from Houston. So that was something that was very dramatic to me. The other thing is that it's important to realize that Puerto Rico exists in a colonial context. It exists in a problematic relationship with the United States at this time. And what that means is that we have an ongoing economic crisis in Puerto Rico that has been worsened by the PROMESA Act and by the implementation of an externally appointed fiscal oversight and management board. And their response to the economic crisis has been to instill austerity measures. And these austerity measures have created a humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico. And so when Hurricane Maria hit in 2017, when the earthquake swarm began. We've had over 5,000 earthquakes in the southwestern portion of the main island of Puerto Rico to date, when they began in December of 2019, and when the global pandemic of COVID emerged in 2020. These stratified disasters were impacting a space that was already economically damaged. And so that's something that comes across in the stories, that here are groups of people with extremely limited socioeconomic resources who are building strength, who are building community, who are building resources, and oftentimes pulling that out of nothing.
Okay. Thank you so much for that answer. And then could you share what were some of your goals? What were some of your hopes? What did you want to do? I mean, you've done so much.
Raquel, that's kind of a mean question. Okay, does everybody have 4 hours? Well, I guess, yeah, not to be too radical on Thursday evening, but the goal was to burn it all down, and to say that the systems that exist to support people are not effective. They are not systems that treat people with dignity and respect. We saw this in Katrina, and instead of saying, let's think about how we address the climate crisis, let's think about the communities who are frontline communities and in the face of climatological disaster, and change our systems so that we can support our people, support citizens of the United States safely, positively, and with respect. That's not something that happened. And so one of the objectives with the narrative was to share the stories of the people of Puerto Rico who survived Hurricane Maria, so that we can make some real change here. The climate crisis is not going to go away. This is our story. This is what happened to us, but these lessons are for everyone. So that was one important objective with the book. The other thing was to help students. You know, it's really disheartening to see these young people who are the future, not only of Puerto Rico, but the future of the world, feel so disempowered. And that's not the truth. We do have power. We do have voice. And it's important to understand that we have to put that voice to work. And so listening to our communities and teaching students how to do that radical act of listening to another human being's story and circulate that, and then understanding that these stories have essential information in them on a global scale.
That's beautiful. The radical act of listening. You think it's very simple, but it's also in that story. But speaking of strange stories, we are lucky to, I am lucky, to be physically here with one of our people that shared with you. So, Laurel, you going to read a little bit? Yes? Of what you.
Yes.
A piece of your story, and then we're going to ask her a couple questions.
But after Risha, I just want to say that my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that's not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. And that's what I hope to get out of these conversations with Rita, with Raquel, and with Voice of Witness. Because we need radical change, and we need to talk about the difficult conversations that spark that change. I'm going to read a little bit of the insert on the book. Okay? People here were and still are discriminated against because they're poor. For literally on the outside of the walls San Juan, one of the biggest tourist areas in Puerto Rico, and also a neighborhood where very affluent people live. I think we have one of the largest in the U.S. So that wall between the neighborhood is literal, but it's also mental. I appreciate and love the historical wall, but I always wonder, how can I turn down that mental wall? Here and also in Puerto Rico, where my grandfather lived, are the communities where we've kept the poor. About 1,200 people live in La Perla right now. There are families that were born and raised here, and they pride themselves on that. But this is mostly a place where people come and go. The community is extremely vulnerable. Our people have been systemically treated badly all of our lives. Nobody's going to help our community because La Perla is also coveted now. This is the prime real estate zone. In 2012, Donald Trump came here and he wanted to buy the land to turn this into Santorini or another Greek island community. If no help comes here, people are hoping that it becomes abandoned. That's what they want. That's why I say the lack of aid here is systemic. It is by design.
Thank you for sharing those words. And can you share with us a little bit of how was it to share your story with Alicia? There were a number of virtuals, there was an in-person one, and then why did you even want to be a part of this project? Not that it's not an incredible project, but it could be difficult. You know, it's hard to do
It
some
is
of this work.
difficult because once I say yes because I'm a little bit crazy and special, and I love sharing and creating chaos and sparking up difficult conversation. We need more of those to have a better world. But once I was doing the interview, I realized that when you are looking at your life as a narrator, it suddenly hits you what you've been through, vulnerable, and it was a process. And after that, you have to read your own story to edit, and I took a long time. I'm sorry, Risha, to read mine because it was difficult to read about myself, and I was just humbled by what I've been through and where I'm going, because this has not ended here. We're still in the middle of a crisis. Um, Something's gotta give. We need to start building from the bottom.
Why did you want to be a part of this project? Why was this important? Why is this important?
To me, Puerto Ricans historically have been systemically excluded and institutionally oppressed, resulting in creating the conditions for a land grab. And this is happening right now. And if we don't start educating people in the States and people in the diaspora, it will happen uh, sooner than we expect. And this is my way of trying to build a legacy for Puerto Rico as a nation. And it's something bigger. Somebody got to start it. Somebody's got to push it. I'm crazy enough to pursue that. And
Oh, brave. We can use the word brave. I really like the word vulnerable.
yes, yes, yes.
I can just imagine getting the word back because I understand it was 6 interviews, 7 interviews.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it was a
yeah.
bunch. It was a number of hours. So there's a lot of material for the team
Yes.
to have to work with. So with your narrative, you dealt with a lot of things. You dealt with colonialism, you dealt with inequality, gentrification, and this massive lack of support for this neighborhood in specific of La Perla and Federal. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like what you were being interviewed at, what the essay shared with us?
Well, I saw that humanitarian aid coming in the pier every morning. We saw hundreds and hundreds of ships of humanitarian aid coming to Puerto Rico. Yet we didn't see any of it come out. And 14 days passed and nobody came to us anything if we needed anything, and people were starting to go hungry. They didn't have water. We didn't have anything. And we are 2 minutes away from the governor's mansion. And that broke my heart because I thought about the multiplying effect. So I could take a guess and know that all the people in Puerto Rico were suffering, were neglected, were going through the most horrible struggles, and that broke me. And I didn't wanna lose it, so I started helping out people and organizing and moving mountains, and that's all I could do because I'm crazy thinking about the neglect and the lack of help and the suffering of people in Puerto Rico. Um, it's, we are still suffering, and we are still losing a lot of people to the diaspora, and it hurts. It hurts that our brothers and sisters are being pushed out of our island um, because of these laws and conditions that have been enacted in Congress to create that land grab situation. If we don't speak up, nobody's gonna listen. And that's I'm using this forum to try to bring attention to those issues here and talk about them and try to find solutions to them. And this is a good start.
And then in the chapter, we're physically in community arts space. We're in front of some papeles, which are some of the drums that you made. I read your chapter, and then I had a connection with you because of the work you were doing in Arting with William Sabella. Could you speak a little bit about that workshop that you were doing?
Yes.
Yeah. And let me interrupt for 1 second. Raquel, the team at Busboys and Poets is asking you to move a little closer to the microphone so that we can all hear the wonderful things you're saying.
Okay, sorry. So just as we're physically in the art space, we're surrounded by some of these incredible drums that some of them were made during this rough time. So if you could speak a little bit about that part of the project.
Well, it was brought to my attention by a neighbor. All the projects I work with in La Perla are brought by neighbors. I analyze it. I see if they are a good business model and a good business plan, and then we pursue them. I saw a lot of value in bringing a bomba musical education program to La Perla just because we lost that tradition right here. And I wanted to bring it back and rescue it. And it was amazing. It was amazing. We built 16 bomba barrels. We built two was, and we now, after the music education program, we have a workshop here making bomba barrels and selling them and teaching people how to. And then every Friday afternoon, we have a day down by the ocean, a community place where they could relieve, feel a relief from all this stress, from all this trauma. And artists was keeping us sane. And it's allowing us to tell our own narrative and not having us being told our narrative from people in power. So that's something that's beautiful, and we need more of that in Puerto Rico right now.
Okay, great. So we're hearing art and storytelling and using the materials, making them, and then coming together as a community and doing that. And wonderful. And then with the introduction that Risa Island did, it's beautifully written. There's you've done many things, but there's one discussing the power of sharing and listening to stories. Could you elaborate a little bit on that point?
Yes, Raquel, can you just move a little closer to Laurel? I think folks are having a hard time hearing you, and I just didn't hear the end of that question. Could I please elaborate on a part of the intro, which is
Discussing the power of sharing and listening to stories?
Yeah, thank you. I think that that's a great question because I think that Laurel has already touched upon that. Voice of Witness uses a trauma-informed approach that asks narrators to tell parts of their whole life story so that a narrator is never reduced to only what they have gone through, only their experience in the hurricane, only their experience receiving goods. And that can be a very overwhelming experience for a narrator, as Laurel has said, to look at themselves and look at their life story. And we have to choose parts of the life story to tell because the publishers won't let us publish 1,000-page books as much as we want to. And so I think that in one way, it's a little overwhelming to say, oh my goodness, that's my life on a piece of paper. But on the other hand, when I talk about the radical act of listening, I think that there's something extremely empowering about being the protagonist of your own story and saying, I did this, I did that. And then to look at the typed up version and say, oh my goodness, maybe I was feeling helpless. Maybe I was feeling sad. Maybe I was feeling angry. But if I look at this story, I see what I did. And I love that oral history or any form of narrative, whether it's visual or musical or what have you, is an act that allows a person to see themselves from the outside looking in. And so maybe they're feeling troubled, maybe they're feeling sad, maybe they're feeling helpless, but then to look at that story written up, it does something different. The other thing is that we know multiple scientists who are working on climatology and working on the climate crisis are naming one of the largest problems with addressing the climate crisis as the fact that folks can't see a way into the issue. Climatologists are telling us that the problem is too large or too abstract for people to engage with what needs to happen and what we all need to be thinking about right now. Storytelling, one person telling their story to another person, that narrative transaction opens a door and creates an entry point for folks into the issue. Oh my goodness, this is what Laurel went through. Laurel is an actual human. I can identify with her story, and that makes me understand this extremely large global issue on a personal level.
What can people do? So I want people to take action. Laurel definitely wants people to take action. We want people to show solidarity with communities in Puerto Rico. How?
Yeah, I have to say that I love Laurel's point that the diaspora is very important at this point. And I will say that our definitions of diaspora and our understandings of diasporic communities had to change after Hurricane Maria because of the way that the diaspora was engaged, because of the way that when no other help was forthcoming, people in the continental United States organized together and said, if I self-identify as Puerto Rican, this is the time for me to stand up. And we saw that again and again. And so I do think that we need to understand that our voice is extremely powerful. We need to understand that part of what happens when you exist in the colonial context of Puerto Rico is that you are a US citizen, but you do not have the same rights and benefits of US citizens anywhere else in the United States. And what that means is that you could live in Ponce today and not be able to vote and move to New Jersey tomorrow and be able to vote. And that is not okay. That is not okay. So we need to understand that there are systems in place where our voice and our actions matter. And sometimes in the Puerto Rican archipelago, we cannot access those benefits of citizenry. And so we need to rely upon folks in the diaspora to use their voices and their votes on our behalf and on their own behalf. We are living in a terrible moment in which some pretty disturbing actions have come out this past week, and this is the time to fight, and this is the time to organize. I always say, if you have a little bit of extra money and you can think about a person who needs food, a person who needs care, and you can put your work there, that is amazing. But if you have time and energy, put your time and energy into organizing. And if you have a vote, please use it. Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And then, Laurel, are there any other pieces regarding action that you would like to share with people?
Well, yes, I wanted to say a compliment what Marisha was talking about that for me in my story, the first humanitarian aid that Rafaela received came from the diaspora, and we got it only because the people in the diaspora came with the sure that it got here. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten that humanitarian aid. And they were crucial to saving lives, to building up small hospitals, going to the mountains, rescuing people. I saw something really beautiful and powerful after reading Maria. And I love history, and W.H. Harris once wrote that no ethnic group has a greater pride in itself and its heritage than the Puerto Rican people. And that's what I saw, because we helped each other. We became a family. People from the diaspora and Puerto Ricans here were one. We were one nation, united, for the benefit of all Puerto Ricans. And we shouldn't lose that feeling. We need that connection desperately right now. And that's something that needs to be discussed, and we need to keep talking about that.
Great, thank you. And then once all of you buy the book, there's a list of 10 different points that are given, so you should do all of them. But I think Laura and Risha have picked the top ones that are very dear to their hearts. So now we're gonna open it up to questions that people might have that they would like to.
Yeah, but going back to the book, know your neighbors. Have an inventory of all the resources, human resources and material resources in your communities, because climate change is real and you need to be prepared. Okay, that is something that I learned from Morgan Maria, that is engraved on the book. Read it, but also do it. Take it into action. Know your neighbor. Know who's the therapist, the nurse, the plumber, the electrician, all the people that can be there in case of something going wrong. And we need to be prepared. Things are going to happen. Climate change.
Yeah. Yep.
Did you want to add anything to that, Risha?
Excuse me. I think that Laurel is right on there. You know, especially coming out of 2 years of a global pandemic where we stayed inside and we didn't talk to people. We do need to be talking to people, and we do need to think to ourselves, who in my neighborhood is a person who might need some extra support? You know, that I see a really interesting question here. What was the most surprising thing to you about your community's response to Maria? And Laurel, I'm sure you have some important answers to that. One of the things that was really shocking to me was that you know, we have a narrator in the volume, Wendy, who was trapped inside of her house for 2 weeks because she has mobility issues and her wheelchair ramp was blocked with debris. And there was nobody in the municipio who said, you know, oh, if ever there's an emergency, Wendy's going to need some additional help. And that was really shocking to me, to think that those resources aren't established. You know, Belmari in her narrative says that, yes, in the municipio of Culebra, there was a satellite phone, but nobody had ever been told that it needed to be maintained with a new fee every year. And so everybody thought that they had a satellite phone, but what they had was a fancy paperweight. And so it's this idea that, you know, we're not thinking ahead as we need to be thinking ahead because climate change is here. And unfortunately, and I'm so sorry to have to say this, we are going to have another emergency. And we need to think, who is the most vulnerable person in our community who needs, you know, as much support as we can possibly extend. Not only what supplies do I need for myself, but what do I need for the community that I live in? Because when push comes to shove, there is no way that you're going to deny your neighbor. And you know, we just need to be thinking in those ways. What resources do I have? How can I leverage them for the good of my community?
Did you want to comment on that question at all,
Well, the most surprising thing about my community response to Maria was that we took care of our elders and the people that couldn't come out of their houses and have disabilities. We had an inventory of them, and they were the first to be taken food and red juice and coffee and groceries. And that is the first people that we should be thinking after an emergency. So if you could have an inventory of that in your community, you could save lives, as well as where's the best place to store food and create a pantry, a community pantry. What's the best place that we could have for a community kitchen? What's the best place that we could have for a community hospital? Where can we keep the insulin, the diabetes, and where can we make some ice? These are basic things that we take for granted, and my community showed me that it needed to be done. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I also want to say, you know, what Laurel was talking about with the bomba drums and making the bomba drums, one of the things that we found out is that there were a couple of community centers across the archipelago that have music programs. And, you know, I think sometimes when we think about responding to disaster, we think about, you know, the first responders and we have to focus on the first responders, and maybe music isn't part of that. Music is 100% part of that. And the thing, you know, two things that I want to say is that after Hurricane Maria, the suicide rate in Puerto Rico jumped up by 39%. It jumped up by 39% because of the hopelessness that people felt, because of the lack of ability to maintain and direct your own life. And music programs, art programs, programs like ours helped people get their feet under them. The other thing that I want to say is that what we realized in our study is that a lot of these music programs were geared towards children. The schools were closed for months, and parents had to stand in water lines, stand in gas lines, worry about how they were going to feed their children that day. And so an arts program that could help take care of the children and support the children in the community during this time was absolutely 100% essential.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think everyone on this call agrees and believes in the power of art and in music. So another question that has been given to us is, how do people in the U.S. and residents help our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters? So the call's happening, most of us in Puerto Rico, but I'm from the diaspora. A lot of people on this call are from not in Puerto Rico. What can they do? What should they be doing?
Then here in the book that you can do. I'm not gonna spoil the time, so get the book, okay? But on top of that, we need to have serious conversations, and not only with the diaspora, people that are interested in what's going on in Puerto Rico can be part of the change to help us make it happen. It's all about education and talking to our neighbors and talking to each other, because at the end of the day, we will find out that we have more things in common than differences. And,
Yeah.
we can hear each other out and support each other. And we need more of that in the world. And we need to start building from the bottom up, from coming up with solutions with your neighbors. That's the closest thing you have to a family. And most people in the US do not know their neighbors. So start with that. Start with growing your community, knowing your neighbor, building a community. And you'll see if something happens, you have a net of support and you'll save lives. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. And in addition to that, the Department of Homeland Security oversees FEMA, and FEMA has failed again and again, specifically in Puerto Rico, but largely in communities of color and communities that have lower socioeconomic stability. So we can contact the Department of Homeland Security IDEAR community online, and thousands of people can write in and say, why do you keep failing frontline communities? And can FEMA please adjust their thinking so that they are addressing climate change? In addition to that, the people of Puerto Rico cannot vote, as I mentioned. You can call or write your own congressperson, since we cannot, and you can say, what the heck is going on here? I feel like that's not good. The Financial Oversight and Management Board from PROMESA is implementing unjust measures that are harming our children, harming our elders, and harming our quality of life. The U.S. House Committee on Natural Resources oversees the FOMB and all issues pertaining to Puerto Rico. Drop them a line and tell them what you think about what they are doing here. One of the things that Puerto Rico is quite famous for, and we are doing quite well, is mutual aid organizations. Every time we see a problem, there are a number of people in the community coming together to solve that problem. Sometimes that's food security, sometimes that's agriculture, sometimes that's childcare, sometimes that's elder care. In the Mi Maria book, there is a central space to contact the Puerto Rican network of mutual aid centers that you can find online, or you can email me.
Yes, I need to answer that, Rachel, very much. But we need to abolish the Jones Act. We need to abolish Act 22. We need to abolish Act 60. We need to create a repatriation act that allows people from the diaspora to return to their island with the incentive that they're giving to the rich. We can find solutions. But we need to talk to our congressmen. We need to learn who they are, and we need to be pushy about it.
Thank you. All right. So everyone joining us, many options. So please pick a couple of them. And then someone wanted to know regarding COVID, has that hampered recovery efforts? Is it bolstering the community's recovery? What has COVID done on top of the hurricane, the earthquake, and other things?
Yeah, I'm going to channel my anger on this one, Laurel, if you don't mind. We still have 20,000 homes in Puerto Rico that are under blue roof tarps from September 2017. We have ongoing earthquake swarms that have undermined the structural stability of homes, schools, etc. We have unsafe drinking water. We have, in a movement of disaster capitalism, the company called Luma was allowed to lease the electric utility in Puerto Rico. After they took over the electric utility, 1 million people lost their electricity. And so how are we sheltering in place? How are we washing our hands? How are we staying safe and away from people when our homes are still damaged, when our water is not running, and when our electricity is off? And so, yes, COVID has absolutely hampered the recovery, and I refer to this as stratified disaster. At the same time that we are still in the long aftermath of hurricanes Irma and Maria, at the time in which we are still in an ongoing earthquake swarm, at a time in which we are still in the global pandemic, We're in an economic crisis caused by colonialism, PROMESA, and the FOMB. I would also like to say that because of the FOMB and the colonial relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States, our medical system has suffered greatly. Doctors have left Puerto Rico in large numbers because the financial system is not able to support their work here, and the resources for folks with lower incomes have dissipated as well. So what we need to support people during a global pandemic does not exist in the archipelago.
Yes, I would like to add that people have been impoverished during COVID, especially small businesses. We have lost many of those small and medium businesses, and we are seeing large companies from the U.S. moving in and bringing aid to Puerto Rico or bringing jobs, but they are really moving in and pushing us out of the island.
Okay, yeah, no. 3 million Puerto Ricans on the island, 5 million Puerto Ricans off of the island.
5.7 million strong. We should start moving in mass to small states and changing elections. But that's another conversation.
So, to totally change the tone a little bit, another question was, what gives you comfort or hope for this ongoing fight? So, I don't know. Whether you want to start with this one and then.
Seeing the creativity of my neighbors, seeing the creativity of Puerto Ricans, we asked the governor without violence, and we're going to ask the other governor right now, hopefully without violence too. That is something that before COVID, we were leading the example for the world, and most of the countries were rising up against their governments, and we need to getting back into that tune a little bit. I know that COVID is more under control and the restrictions have been lifted. We need to start being more creative, to bring change and revolt in a way that's non-violent, but that changes, that brings real change. And we need creative people to do that.
And then what gives you comfort or hope?
What is giving me comfort and hope right now is Laurel and the other narrators in my book. Raquel, who agreed to be part of this, Voice of Witness, who supported this book, Busboys and Poets, audiences who keep showing up and listening, and the 500 undergraduate students at the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez who have been involved in oral history for social justice since November 5th, 2017 through today, and the fact that we are actively receiving funding for an oral history crisis lab on our campus so that we are prepared to help our students, our communities, and bring stories to larger audiences so that people are aware not only of what people are surviving, but what they are doing actively to fight the climate crisis, to fight the legacies of colonialism, and to fight systems of racism that are surrounding us.
Thank you. And then I know you are very youngest. You have a book as well, correct?
Can you say that again, Raquel?
Your picture book with our youngest audience.
Yes. So our picture book that was published also last year in 2021 is also a school project that was co-authored with myself and another student in my class. We wanted to take one of the courses that we teach at the university is taking an oral history and then starting a citizen scientist or mutual aid project based upon that oral history. The oral history that this student chose was from a Head Start teacher in Ponce. The Head Start teacher told us that after the hurricane, when they opened the classroom, The students gathered around her desk and they said, "Teacher, we have nothing to eat. Teacher, my house is gone. Teacher, I can't find my grandma. What should I do?" And so the students in this particular group that selected that oral history to study decided that they wanted to create a resource for the children of Puerto Rico. One of the things that they did was they interviewed a social worker about what the needs of children after disaster are. And we found out together that children were terrified of every rain after the hurricane because they thought that Hurricane Maria was coming back. So this is Maxi survives the hurricane, Maxi sobrevive al huracán, and it's published by Arte Publico Press.
Thank you. And speaking of children and students, there is a very robust curriculum that has been created to support the book. It's 50 plus pages. There is a lesson plan on community action, another on interdependence, one on representation, one on climate change and colonialism. That's also in Spanish, bravo. And then there's interdependence in Puerto Rico. So I would encourage everyone to share with teachers, with professors, this information, and to get it into as many hands and as many spaces as possible. And the book can be purchased by incredible, wonderful independent bookstores like Busboys and Poets. It can also be purchased online at Haymarket. So have one. And then we are going to be having a book club on July 26th. So, does someone want to speak on that briefly? I'm going to be traveling that day, so I don't know how y'all are doing it.
Ya regresé para hablar de eso. Hello, hello. And thank you all so much for joining us. So we do have a book club. Estamos bien excited for it. And we're actually going to come together. Who's joining us? Raquel, are you giving us the honor? Laurel is giving us the honor.
I'm inspired up.
Pues so you'll get to see Laurel and Gricia también, and then myself included. Hey, y'all. And we'll just kind of be talking about our feelings, our thoughts on reading the book. I'm not going to lie, I'm only halfway through because it's a really heavy book. But it is some of the most like gorgeous writing I've just seen and read. And I'm really excited to get together with either DC folks. This is going to be a virtual book club. So folks from all over the country, even globally, can join us if they would like. If you go onto our Eventbrite page, you'll easily find it. And yeah, I hope you get to join us. And all proceeds from the books, if you purchase from us during that book club, will go right back to Voices of Witness to make sure that we help support the really awesome work that they and Haymarket Press are doing. Yeah.
Minutes, any final words? Laurel, Keisha, would you like to share? Lori, and thank you so much, Lori, for making this happen.
Yes.
I'm grateful and humble that I got invited to be a part of this. Thank you, Rico. Thank you for everybody that made it happen with us. It gave us a voice, and we need more of that, those spaces. It's really and speak the truth because there are not many outlets for Puerto Ricans to speak the truth. And then our own story is told by people in power, and what comes is not really what's going on.
Yeah, just to echo Laurel, our voices are very, very powerful and very, very important. And the reason why folks are trying to silence them and the reason why folks are trying to take away opportunities for people to speak is because those voices are very important. So thank you very much to Busboys and Poets and to Voice of Witness and to Raquel for helping create spaces for us to share our voices.
Of course. Thank you all so much to you guys for joining us. We all really appreciate it here. And I just want to remind folks that, Puerto Rico is still a modern day colonialist project. So if you are a U.S. citizen, a U.S. resident, or, have some kind of privilege to call your own, use it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Puerto Rico has been in the shadow of the United States for so long. And honestly, it's a crisis. It's been a crisis. So now it's time for us to learn and hopefully figure out ways to not only advocate for you all, but also empower Puerto Ricans themselves. So
Yeah.
thank you all.
Thank you, Laurel, so much. That was so nicely said. And very happy to see you, Laurel. Thank you, Raquel.
All right. Good.
I love getting good job.
All right. Good night to everyone. Buenas noches. And we hope to see you guys for the book club. Bye-bye.
Thank you.